Well, first, let me thank Bill and Bob for putting us, getting us all together for this. This would not be possible without all the work behind the scenes that you guys are doing, and shoulder to shoulder, all the great work you guys do there. Like Bob mentioned, Bill, Joe, and I at one point were all working in the Innovation Academy together, and now we've definitely stayed in very close touch. And so we get to hear all about all the great work that you guys do as well with shoulder to shoulder. So thank you. I'm Corey Topf, and I'm the current director of the Innovation Academy Online and the proud founder of the IA at the American School in Lima, Peru, where Joe is currently. So Joe?
Yeah, so I'm Joe Bonnici. I come from Malta, a tiny island in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the Mediterranean. And I'm currently the coordinator for the program in the brick and mortar version of the IA here in Lima, Peru. And yeah, thanks for having us here. And Bob, we'll try and be as concise as we can, because if you tell a Mediterranean to take more than 15 minutes, it can be dangerous.
I was going to say, first of all, I don't think Malta's from no place, and also, yeah, I can identify with the Mediterranean. So we'll do the best we can.
Awesome. Well, this is where we share screen, as is now the case often on Zoom. And I just, again, the thank yous. You guys got your own slide to show how grateful we are. Seriously, to Bob and Bill, and also to all of our panelists today. For all the people joining us who are not on the Zoom chat, if you just want to take a quick look at this screen so you can see the people that are dedicating their time today to ask some questions and sit in with us. Thank you all again for giving your time and joining us. We really appreciate it. Joe and I are really excited today to talk about how we've taken one of the projects that kids really loved in the Innovation Academy, and we put it online for students throughout the world. We started planning around April this past year, and we got it going in July. But to continue the gratitude a little bit, we're incredibly thankful to these 22 schools who joined us over the summer for the summer course. And if any of them happen to be here today, any of the teachers or administrators, thank you, because without you reaching out to the students and sending emails and following up, this would have never happened. And thanks to the students like Paloma and Camille for being here today too, because without the students taking the leap to something they had never heard of or seen before, this wouldn't be possible either. So thank you all. The course they took and that they are taking right now is called The Imperfect Art of Living. And it's a cool course that combines philosophy, psychology, cognitive science, filmmaking, and it challenges students to answer this question: how do we design meaningful lives in such an uncertain world? And it's fairly relevant right now, I think.
And as we were envisioning this program, we were imagining having 12 to 20 students. But as Corey was saying, we got a lot of support from teachers and administrators from those schools. And we also had the US Department of Overseas Schools fund the program. And that was a game changer, really, because we were able to offer to lower tuition from $500 to $200. So sure enough, with all this help we received, we had 55 applicants. We were able to accept them and open 3 cohorts, which was awesome. One of those students, Paloma Corona, is here with us today, and during the Q&A session will be telling us more from her perspective how this experience was. What was really cool too, though, was getting more people in to help us create this program. We had Sarah Cadena and Adriana Lassos who helped a lot with activities, but we were also able to have co-teachers. We had Sarah Bivin from the American School Foundation of Monterey, and we also had Lola, who not only is she a middle school teacher, but she's also my old student from Roosevelt, and Corey's old student too. So it was great to have an alumnus from Colegio Roosevelt be part of this journey too as a co-teacher. And as we started the program, we were getting a good vibe because we were wondering how would this pan out. But students seemed engaged. They were participating for the most part in one-to-one meetings. We were realizing that students, through anecdotal feedback, they were really enjoying the program. And we got that confirmation when we gave them the survey in the end. We had 39 students take that survey out of the 55. And something that stood out was that all 39 students who took the survey told us that they would highly recommend this program to a friend. And something that was really close to our heart was the anecdotal feedback. And I'd like to take the time to read 2 pieces of feedback that pretty much capture, I think, the students' perspective here. The first student said, "I know that being vulnerable is uncomfortable and even intimidating. But the people in this course are so genuine and honest that the environment they create together will make you feel incredibly safe and comfortable to open up." Another student said, "I would honestly say that it has been life-changing. I learned a lot about myself and I became a part of a unique and wholehearted community that taught me a lot about meaning and belonging." And we've chose these quotes because yes, they really spoke to us. But there are some words there that are going to reemerge in this presentation: vulnerability, belonging, and wholeheartedness.
And that feedback that we got from the students also pushed us to see if we could take that summer program and turn it into a semester-long academic course that kids actually got academic credit for too. And thanks to these 10 schools, we now have 40 students that are getting academic credit and taking the course with us. We started in August and we'll go until December. And we have one student in particular who's taking the semester course named Camille Forsyth, and she is here from Colegio Roosevelt, who you'll get to ask questions to later. And he might be able to join us, but it's his Friday night. We have a cool situation where the American school in Japan, we couldn't make the time work for some of their kids to join in on the kind of collaborative mixed groups. But what they've done is take the course and they're teaching it on their own to 10 students. And Aaron Alcadre is the teacher and friend of ours who's doing that at ASIJ in Tokyo. And so hopefully he'll be able to join us and answer some questions about how that's going as well. So what we really want to talk about today is how did we get here? How did we go from the brick and mortar, face-to-face Innovation Academy that was heavily focused on interdisciplinary kind of project-based learning? And now here we are presenting to you about how to design meaningful learning together. How has that journey unfolded a little bit and how do we get here? And a lot of it comes from this book that I read for the first time in 2017, because the current project that we're doing called The Imperfect Art of Living actually started as a project called Iterating Through Life that we did primarily with juniors and seniors in the Innovation Academy to give them an opportunity to think more deeply about themselves in life right before going off to university. And we were really focusing on, seeing your life as this ongoing iteration by reading things like Designing Your Life and using design to make cool changes to our lives. And then we were reading a book called Constellations of Philosophy too. 2 books that are awesome and we still read, but it just felt like something was missing a little bit. Like we weren't applying some really important things that we could have been doing. And it was in 2017 that this book came out and I read it because it sounded like a book that would connect to the course. And what I loved about it is that Emily Esfahani-Smith takes some really important research from psychology, from philosophy, from cognitive science, and she organizes what it means to live a meaningful life into 4 really important categories: belonging, purpose, storytelling, and transcendence. And not only did this immediately connect to the course, but one thing that Joe and I started to see was that this really gave us a framework and kind of the grammar for what was working really well in the Innovation Academy. When kids told us they loved the program, it was often because they felt a strong connection to their peers. They felt like the work they did was relevant and gave them an opportunity to find their thing. And we did a lot with blogging and TED Talks, and that gave them an opportunity to figure out kind of their narrative identity and dive through their own stories. And Transcendence is all about like looking beyond yourself and your own ego. And with the work that we did in the Innovation Academy, it pushed students to contribute to things beyond themselves and just, write a paper and turn it into their teacher. The work was more authentic and relevant and had an audience that mattered. So the question is, Joe?
Yeah, like how do you take something like belonging and how does it look like in class, in a program or in a curriculum? For us, truth be told, out of the 4 pillars, belonging when it came to the brick and mortar version of the IA came naturally. Because I mean, students work face to face all year long, and they're a small group of students. And to add to that too, we take different subjects and we combine them together. And what that gives is more time for students to learn together. In fact, we have English, Humanities, and Media during that time. Students use those subjects to create a project. But as they're doing a project, in this case, the magazine, they're figuring stuff out together and learning to create a safe environment. And these elements create really a great opportunity for connection, a tightly knit group. But then we go to belonging. As we're thinking about it in an online setup, we had to acknowledge that those very elements that made belonging so organic now all of a sudden were far removed. Because now we had an online course where we're communicating through a screen. Students did not know each other. And we had only 1 month to create some form of connection. So we took this understanding and the awareness of these limitations and barriers to design yet a new version of the IA, and that would become the IA Online. And we all started by asking this question, like, how can we design for belonging in these conditions? The first thing that we did was to ensure that we would have an application form that highlighted the word vulnerability, that highlighted the need for students to contribute, because we wanted students to know what they were getting themselves into and actually choose to do this program because it was so leaning towards vulnerability. And we also designed it in a way where we would expose students to sources such as the power of meaning, but also talk a bit about vulnerability in per se, because sometimes I think this is a word that can sound a bit as the buzzword right now. It can sound gimmicky. And what we wanted to do was really make an argument for the fact that a lot of organizations are able to thrive because of vulnerability. So we were able to show studies, but also bring TED Talks like the power of vulnerability that kind of shows in 17 minutes how really vulnerability is a spark that leads to trust and connection.
And another important design was limiting the cohorts to 20 students. As soon as we found out that there was more interest than we initially had thought there would be, we reached out to, again, other teachers and made sure that we limited the cohorts to no more than 20. And we also broke these down into life design teams of 4 students, that these students stayed together throughout the month as a way to build that ongoing consistent connection. And we also wanted to make sure that they were from different schools. And fortunately, from the makeup that we had, we were able to do that. And in those life design teams, another huge aspect of creating this sense of ownership and belonging is allowing them to lead meaningful discussions about the books that we were reading for the course. And this is a screenshot of 4 students, plus Lola sitting in on this discussion about ego death and loss of self-identity, which is part of Transcendence and the Power of Meaning. And all these questions that he came up with are from him, with some feedback from us, but they get to lead it and talk, and we're kind of just flies on the wall during those discussions. We also really challenge the students to apply the things that they're reading about and learning about in the course through different challenges and videos. And one of the challenges is a documentary that they create about a friend or a family member or someone in their life that they want to try to deeply connect with or reconnect with. And this is Paulina Navarro's, a screenshot of her documentary that she did for a friend that she wanted to reconnect with, so that they're putting into practice the challenge of reaching out to someone, because what they have to do that week is find ways to contribute to this person. And then they share this documentary with them at the end as a kind of final tribute and contribution to them. And one final thing we have students do, we pair them with someone outside of the cohort, and they do Flipgrid videos as reflections. And so this is a girl named Karen from United World College in Southeast Asia, and she's reflecting on some takeaways from the course, and her buddy is from another cohort, and they would watch each other's Flipgrid videos. And the reason I've chosen this one for us to listen to today is because she talks a little bit about the importance of connection in the course.
Another thing I found really interesting about the course so far was just the sense of community we have within the cohort, like especially in my life design team. I'm actually the only person in my school who's doing this course for like this semester, I guess. So everyone in the course is a stranger to me, and it's just really interesting how even from like week one, everyone said like pretty personal things about themselves, and we've all had like a shared understanding of being respectful, and we've all given really good advice. And it's crazy because some of the stuff I talk about in this course I wouldn't talk about to my closest friends. So I think it's really cool how we have this opportunity to connect around the world through technology.
And here, hopefully this gives you an idea of how students made sense of this program. And what we wanted to do here is show you tangibly how you can take one of these, big ideas and explicitly put it into a program. And the same thing we did for belonging, we had to do for purpose, storytelling, and transcendence. And here's where we're starting to get closer to the takeaway. Because if there's something that we'd like to emphasize, is this. When we started the program, we were huge believers of project-based learning. I would tell my students that the project is the baby. And yes, we still do projects. But as effective as PBL is, and as much as we love interdisciplinary learning, it is not the end-all, be-all of education and making powerful learning. What's at the core of it? It's meaning. And to us, it's important that we convey this, because for us, designing activities and designing an experience that had meaning was a game changer to create strong cultures within the IA.
And projects and interdisciplinary learning are one way to get at meaningful learning and designing a culture of meaningful learning. But they're not the only way. And that's something that we learned, and being able to put our focus there, like Joe said, was a game changer. And what's cool is that the research is really starting to back this up too. There's a great article in Educational Leadership magazine titled "Building Meaning Builds Teens' Brains." And it's about how giving students a chance to tackle big ideas and to dive into their narrative story and narrative identity helps them make sense of the world, helps them become more critical thinkers. And as it says here, it helps shape their neural networks over time. And so in the course, again, we really challenge students to think about how can we design meaningful lives in such an uncertain world. For us as teachers, as leaders, it's really important that we think about how can we design meaningful learning together for our students. And that's what we want to talk about and think about today And we look forward to your questions. And thank you all for joining us as we dive deeper into this. I'm going to stop share so we can get some Q&A going. But again, thank you all for joining us. And anybody who's out there that's not on the screen, like Bill said at the beginning, please feel free to put some questions in the chat. So thank you.
Corey and Joe, thanks so much for that. You know, what comes to my mind is where you're mining the meaning here is your very thoughtful and kind of sensitive interaction with young people at certain points in their development, their emotional development, intellectual development, educational development, so on and so forth. To me, that when you connect there at the right point in people's development is when meaning will naturally kind of happen and be drawn out of them. You can clearly see this in the programming. And I will tell you, at a time, and Bill and I are talking to so many schools, and Bill, I'm wondering if you can put in the chat box this week's article from Thomas Friedman. I don't know if people have read that, but have you guys read that?
Yeah.
I mean,
Bill sent it out to us.
Oh, okay. All right. And he sent it to me as well. And, you know, this is Friedman talking about what a great chance this is. Not only is it a chance, but it is, it's pushing us in this direction, is not to go back to the norm. And we're talking to schools who are saying, we're overwhelmed. And kind of underneath that is because we need to get back to, school as usual. And for you to show us, even online, that we can create such great meaning for young people to contribute to their lives and to lead them to lives of purpose is just inspiring. So thank you so much. It was a really well-organized presentation and surely enough to get us going here. So with that, I'll open it up to the panel.
Thank you, Bob.
Is it okay if I start?
Peter,
Sure.
I figured we would have to hold you back.
Oh man, just a comment and not a question. The former mission of the school that I now run is that the Mead School nurtures in individuals the capacity to develop a personally meaningful life. Interesting that mission was rejected by the board 10 years ago because they thought it was too egocentric and not community-based enough. Now we are on the board thinking about returning to that mission, which would be dramatic to go back to an old mission. I looked at your phrase, the question, how can we design meaningful lives in an uncertain world? If you were to turn that into a statement, I think that would be a mission that most schools should be living with or designing at the moment. So that's my comment, which comes out of the school I'm now at and a personal experience in struggling with this in a board retreat we just had 2 days ago. So it's very relevant.
Yeah.
My question though about converting to remote learning, and maybe this is the best question for students, is in the checkbox where you said, are you willing to be vulnerable? I'm interested in the connection between vulnerability and extroversion. In other words, how does someone show that they can be vulnerable in a remote learning environment if they are introverted? And the second piece of that question is gender balance also, because even though it is somewhat stereotypical, males are often less willing to do that than females. So and looking at the student profiles too, that came to mind. So could you respond to that? Sorry, that's a kick-ass set of questions, I know.
Oh, that's good. Paloma, you have had a knowing grin on your face.
I noticed that.
For the last few minutes. So what's on your mind?
So I just wanted to respond back and say that I think gender wasn't really a big problem. I think the way that you guys designed the teams and then overall the cohorts, I think they were pretty balanced and just everybody got to say their opinion, their thoughts, and overall be vulnerable. And I think that was one of the biggest questions for me when coming into the course was if everyone was going to be vulnerable or if I was going to be extroverted and in the end no, like no progress was going to be made. But I think like I guess the most extroverted people started talking, and then like I feel like the introverted people also followed, and in the end it was just like a huge community of just talking about your feelings, emotions, your thoughts, and just like I think it was in the end like really productive. So yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was gonna, I guess on top of what you were mentioning there, Peter, because I don't know if this came through or I just know it from your work, but to the students, I know from Joe and Corey that the classes were 3 hours, I believe 3 hours long, twice a week, correct? And I
Three times a
know
week.
3 times a week, 3 hours long. Bob and I were just talking this morning, that feeling of being on Zoom for hours, right? And that draining feeling, and like, and I know from the stories that I heard from Joe and Corey that that wasn't the case. So I think to Camila and Paloma, what was it about the design of the course that on top of what you were already doing, on top of your life being on Zoom, how were you able to be on Zoom for 3 hours with a cohort of classmates and still feel like you were getting something out of it?
And maybe we can start with Paloma, because she did the summer course where it was 3 hours, 3 times a week. And then Emil does it twice a week now for 90 minutes on Tuesday and 90 minutes on Thursday. So maybe Paloma first, how'd that time feel? And then Camille, how's the time feel now with the 90 minutes?
So I feel like at first when we were just starting, it felt kind of long because we were just introduced, like you guys were just introducing the course. But we did have like a break of, I guess, 30 minutes or something like that between like half of the time. But then the rest of the course, I think as we got to more topics and the whole overall framework of the course and just getting to know everyone and I don't know, it just like there were a lot of things happening. Corey made a presentation at the beginning, and then we would go into our life design teams and talk and discuss, and then we would come back. And then, so I think like the whole change of activities was what made it so quickly, like what made time pass by so quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and even towards the end of class, with about 20 minutes, they would break down into their what are called critical buddies too. So they had life design teams of 4 people, and then they'd also have time to work and on their documentaries, their videos, and talk with their critical buddy about those things. So yeah, we tried to make it as dynamic as possible. Camille, how's it feel in the Tuesday, Thursday group?
I actually think that 90 minutes is like perfect, at least for me. And the time goes by like so fast. It feels like 30 minutes, to be honest, because we always have an activity to do. There's never a moment where we're just sitting there in silence, like, or we're talking or cracking like a joke, or Mr. Corey is showing us a presentation, or we're in critical buddies or in our life design teams. It's just so amazing. And the time goes by like so quickly because we always have something to do.
May I jump with a comment
Please.
and question?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say to you guys, and especially to you, Bob, that I love the post that you share in the shoulder to shoulder community regarding the gift of opportunity. And that I totally agree with you when you said that the pandemic is offering us humanity, a mulligan, a redo, an opportunity to change course.
Right.
So thank you for posting that. And just I just want to congratulate you guys for doing this course. This is something amazing and shouldn't be something extra. It shouldn't be a summer course. It shouldn't be something that we sign up. It should be something that we all do in schools in regular basis. So my question for you guys is, what do you recommend us as schools to be working on already? And I'm talking about students who are in early childhood and they go through 12th grade in high school. Do you guys are planning to propose a curriculum? Are you planning to share this with teachers? What do you guys want to go next regarding helping schools to achieve this goal that it should be the first objective in our lives?
Great question. Corey, do I start or you?
I mean, yeah, Joe, go ahead. And then, you know, I just want to say quickly that first we want to model it, right? Because that's huge. Like, and that's what we wanted to do with the summer course, is pilot it and model that, hey, this can be really powerful and effective, and then get that feedback from the kids and see, is this working? So yeah, Joe, go ahead, sorry.
Even going, you know, looking at studies, because we're seeing such a strong connection between students who are self-aware, they tend to do better at school too. So it's a win-win situation. And more than anything, I think what we want is mental health. And from what we've seen with students, this is something that they yearn for, because it allows them to make sense of things. And I think probably my biggest challenge for schools is to step back, and rather than seeing academics and the social emotional learning being as two separate entities, to ask themselves more like, how might we have a balance between the two? So again, design is key. How do this happens in the strategic planning for the whole school, where you have members of boards, teachers, administrators, parents, students, and going in, explicitly thinking of designing something that guides the students to do these types of reflection, because what we see is that students want this, and for a reason. I yearned for this when I was a teenager because I was lost, and being able to talk about meaningful questions would have helped me much more make my own decisions. So for us as teachers now, I think that's what we need to do with the rest of the community, to find time to design meaningful activities, meaningful curriculum, and taking into consideration the context. Because, for instance, our context changed. We went from face-to-face to online. So we had to recognize that and find a way to make ends meet with our new context. That's the challenge, but I think it's got to be planned ahead of time in strategic meetings.
And Alondra, I think one of the reasons why we really want to focus on the designing of meaningful learning is, like we talked about in the presentation, we were really focused initially in the Innovation Academy on projects, on interdisciplinary learning. And I think a lot of schools are moving towards PBL, which is a great way to get kids more engaged, to get them to hit some of these pillars. But what like I said, what we realized was the real motivation, the drive, were these pillars, giving students an opportunity to look outside themselves and transcend the self, giving students an opportunity to find their thing. And what Peter said earlier about meaning, I think it can be such a vague thing, like to say, we want meaningful lives. Okay, what does that mean? And that's why the book really gave us a framework that was research-based. And instead of us just looking at ourselves and how do I design my life, the book reminds us that a meaningful life is often one that you are constantly looking outward. How can I contribute? How can I give back? How can I connect to other people? And it's not about me as much. So,
you know, I think something, Corey, one of the really important things you guys said is in the move towards PBL, and I wouldn't say schools are moving towards interdisciplinary learning. I think they always are moving away from it. They need to move back to it. But in terms of project-based learning, there has been a huge move. There are lots of organizations working on this. I think one of the important things you said is that's not the end in itself, you know, that it's bookended on both sides, you know, as a reason for doing PBLs and as an outcome for that after them, this circle of meaning that you're talking about. And that's really one of the important things you said, because in the rush to PBLs, I think people do forget that there's an underpinning there that's deeper and more transcendental. And Joe, when you said you think adolescents or young people hunger for this, I hope we all do constantly, because that's what it means to be a lifelong learner, right? So all all these missions in schools that said we exist to give people the experience of being a lifelong learner. You've heard all this, the lifelong learning mission, right?
Yeah.
That's an adult mission too. And we need to model that for students, and students model that for us.
One of the,
sorry, go ahead.
one of the pillars that really caught my attention was storytelling.
Yeah.
I do believe storytelling could be something that we teach to a very young child, to an adult, because we all have stories and sometimes we share them or we think about them verbally in our heads, or we can express what we feel about our family, ourselves. And I do believe that the storytelling can drive us to find meaning and go to the other purposes. So I truly want to learn more about that one. Thank you, guys.
I want to jump into a more, I don't know, kind of elephant in the middle of the room. And I'm wondering if Ryan and Brian are thinking about this. And it actually brought me to what Joe had said about design being the key. It is so fundamental, but it's so clear too, that if we look at traditional curriculum in schools, the design did not incorporate what I was talking about earlier, which is the developmental factors of young people. You know, when people are thinking about a math curriculum, they weren't really thinking about what is the meaning of this math curriculum to the students, right? So schools aren't designed that way. So the elephant in the middle of the room is we've got something that all of us intuitively and even experientially can look at and say, this is awesome. This is where we should be. This is where schools should be going. But so many schools are not there. And so even as pragmatic as this sounds, you know, the amount of time and so on, the first thing that probably comes to mind for people that are working in more traditional schools are saying, well, when are we going to do this? Not only when are we going to do it, but credit. And I know you said at the beginning that schools are giving credit for this. And it's very difficult for students. I think students would say is, yeah, I don't have any time. When am I gonna shoehorn this in here? So can you guys maybe, we're a little bit over time, sorry, but maybe take a minute or two and speak to that? How do you break into this paradox? And Ryan and Brian, am I on anything here? Are you guys thinking in those practical terms?
Yeah, I always tell students I'm not a big fan of school, but I'm a high school assistant principal and I love learning. And I think the only way that this conversation happens is being a part of the system. I think I heard tomorrow, Ryan, one of the speakers in the past, over the course of the week, has spoken to this concept. Like, you got to really understand it to know where it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And part of it's the tough conversation that Corey's been having for many years now. And I admire your work, and Joe and Bill, like, just seeing these faces makes me so happy, because they have led with vulnerability at their essence. You know, I remember one time, Corey, you saying like, yeah, I was going to do my doctorate in education at Harvard or something like that. And I got challenged to say, why don't you just do it instead of read a book on it and write a paper? Do the Innovation Academy, do the work we're speaking of. And it is challenging, Bob, in terms of making it work, but I think it's the small steps. I think it's the small steps that, you know, drive these conversations. To have Alondra, my colleague at the American School Foundation Guadalajara, sitting on this conversation with me, and we continue to have these conversations. When you talk to me, I think it was 6 years ago, Bob, and you're like, come on, get ASFG on it. It's a commitment not to lifelong learning, but to lifelong purpose, and identifying that, and not necessarily always being able to articulate it perfectly, but knowing what's right and knowing what is the ethics behind our decisions, and why did we get into this game? Why do I have this picture of a skateboarder in the back of my shoulder here, jumping downstairs over and over again? Because it's a commitment to perseverance to change the game of education. Right. That's been around for 110 years, and the school I work at has been around for 100 and plus 10 years. From the men of 10 or whatever, you know, those guys that drove those decisions. But it's us in this room alongside Peter and alongside Lola, coming up from FDR to being a teacher. Like, that's one of my questions right now for Lola, is just like, so what do you see happening? Like, you must be struggling equally. Like, oh, I was so inspired to do the Innovation Academy type stuff, and what I know Corey and Joe have been doing, and now I'm in the system. But it's all of us having these conversations, coming together to listen to each other and continue. And the fact that this is global right now, like, very literally, not figuratively, in a room. Like I'm sitting in Guadalajara, we got Lake Tahoe, we got New York, we got Costa Rica, we got Vallarta. We got so many different people in this room that's pretty radical. And I think it's this commitment to not giving up. And we're not gonna be perfect, because guess what? Tomorrow I'm gonna have to deal with end of the quarter, or Monday I'm gonna have to deal with the end of the quarter and parent-teacher conferences in a very traditional setting.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I won't push towards what does portfolios look like? How do we change this? How do we, so my dream is still to start my own school, and Corey, hopefully you'll be a part of it at some point, but still might be 10 years from now. And that's okay. It's that commitment to our purpose over the long term. Nothing happens fast.
Yeah.
It can, but in a sustainable way, it can be challenging.
We are not gonna let you go, Brian. I'm sorry.
Shoot, I forgot other people were on the call from my school.
And listening.
Corey, Joe, you want to give a quick response to that? Oh, goodness, Bill, I told you I wouldn't run it over, but I run this thing
Well,
over.
we have a guy from Italy and a guy from Malta, so it was bound to run over. So.
Right.
And Bob Antoni too, you know.
In terms of how to get it into, the everyday schooling, I guess the game we play with that is with the course like this, right? It still it can count as a humanities credit. It can count as an electives credit. It can count as an independent project like Camille's doing it as. But CNG, Colegio Nueva Granada in Bogota is giving, and International School in Curitiba, they're giving their students academic credit for humanities. So ASFM counted it as a philosophy course. And so, over the summer, it was a thing that was an add-on. Now it's embedded, and it's little by little for institutions to say, hey, we're giving credit. We can do it. Why can't you do it? Yeah. And that kind of collaborative, that's a piece of designing together. I think the more we do things together, rather than be the siloed Innovation Academy and FDR, but help each other learn and design these kinds of things and get inspiration from each other. It starts with reaching out. And that's what, it wasn't easy. It was vulnerable for us to reach out to schools and say, hey, do you want to be part of this? Vulnerable because we didn't know if any students or schools would be interested. But by reaching out, we got incredibly lucky, and that's why we're so grateful. So,
there are schools like Avenues that do things like this. I don't think they do it as well as you guys are doing it. They do courses like this. The IB used to offer a much less personal version of the meaning course for juniors in high school. There are schools that have done this. Yours strikes me as a new level of this kind of program, which is exciting. And I did put in the notes, I think this panel deserves a part 2 that really connects it to some larger issues. I also put a book that, Alondra, I'm thinking of you. It's a very famous book by Robert Coles, who's a former Harvard psychologist, called The Call of Stories, Teaching and the Moral Imagination, which is one of the very famous books about storytelling and the moral imagination. I think it was back in the 60s and 70s, but it's a wonderful book.
Peter, will you share the title again in the chat, please?
Yes, I did. I put in the chat. It's called The Call of Stories. I wrote it there, Teaching and the Moral Imagination.
I just saw it. Thank you.
I just clicked on save the chat, so we can add the chat to a slide at the end of the presentation and share the presentation out too.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah, and I would sorry, Bob, I know you're going to close. I'm just going to say, because we have 3 great questions, but I put them on the Google Doc as well, Corey. So maybe you can follow up with Gisela, Carla, and Marcelo, because I think they're definitely really important questions to be answered. So I can get you the emails of those attendees as well.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes.
This is actually kind of a perfect way to close. And thanking Joe and Corey. We're recording this session so that you'll and we'll produce it, I think, in a couple of weeks. But now you'll have this potentially to take to your schools. And whether it's the whole session or whether it's just the first half of the session, to see Joe and Corey's presentation, but you'll at least have this tool to bring to your schools, to your colleagues and so on, and students as well, to bring to your school and say, look, I want you to take a look at this, and maybe as an institution, we can have a conversation. And when we get beyond the idea of taking something that's so beautiful, that's so aligned with human development, instead of having to retrofit it into the system the way it is now, to try to kind of, break into that paradox that we were talking about. Joe and Corey, we're leaving inspired and willing to take on this challenge of this traditional models, and how we bring something like this in to how we see schools and the purpose of schools. So thank you so much for your good work, really organized presentation, and as I said, inspiration for all of us. Thanks so much. And panel, thank you for great discussion.
Thank you for allowing us to tell our story too. It means a lot to us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I just put once again in the chat the link to the Google Doc with all of the resources that were mentioned. And then Corey, I'm sure we can add the presentation to that. And so when this video is produced, we'll make sure the video goes along with that Google Doc so you can see the references that were mentioned in this conversation as well.
Perfect. Again,
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Part 2 coming soon.
See ya.
See you guys.
Bye.